On this day, the 2nd of November 1949, the Dutch agree to hand sovereignty over to the United States of Indonesia. This was what was called the Dutch-Indonesian Round Table Conference. It was held in The Hague from the 23rd of August to the 2nd of November. So the representatives of the Netherlands and the representatives of Indonesia were meeting and negotiating the transfer between Dutch sovereignty over the Dutch East Indies to independence. Indonesia had declared independence in 1945, just after the Japanese surrender. The Indonesian nationalists had become collaborators with the Japanese. When the Japanese invaded in 1942, they were very happy to collaborate with the Japanese. They were hoping for a Japanese victory and that they could use that to assert their independence. The Japanese were never serious about giving them independence, but they said that they would. They were happy to string them along, and they knew that if there was any problems, they could just put down any possible rebellion. And as we saw in the Philippines, the Japanese were not averse to using force to institute their rule, and not even mentioning what they did in China. So when the Japanese did surrender, the Netherlands was in a bit of a pickle. They had just been liberated from German occupation. They were going through a famine at the time, and they didn't have any military force to send to retake the Dutch East Indies. The United States left Indonesia, or the Dutch East Indies, to the British, as they also left French Indochina. So British troops everywhere went in that part of Asia were taking the surrender of the local Japanese troops. Southern French Indochina, British troops landed in Saigon and took the surrender there. The Chinese nationalists took the surrender in northern Vietnam. In Indonesia, it was only British troops, and so they landed and took the various surrenders. There was about 300,000 Japanese troops, and they needed to be transported back to Japan. Now, when they were landing, the Republicans, as they called themselves, the rebels, the separatists, the Indonesian nationalists, at times were cooperative and other times were not very cooperative. Various massacres were already going on. The Indonesian nationalists were killing various Dutch people, Indo-Europeans, as they called them, the mixed race people, who they would have seen as collaborators themselves, and Japanese as well. So it was a bit of a mess, and there was a lot of killing going on. And the British at the time didn't really want to get involved, but they had to restore order as they saw it. And the Dutch, who were still there, came back and started to go back into their offices and start trying to run the place again, which was very difficult considering Java, Sumatra and other places were up in arms. So, for the first year of this conflict, it was mainly British, Indians, Australians and Japanese who were involved in fighting the nationalists in Indonesia. And then by the time, within a year, the Dutch had managed to get enough troops together to send about 50 to 60,000 over, and then the British, the Indians and the Australians left because it wasn't their war. The Dutch decided to get serious, and so from 1946 until 1948, so for basically 2.5 years, there was some serious fighting. The Dutch and the Indonesians both committed some terrible atrocities there. Many tens of thousands had to flee. The Indo-Europeans didn't really have much choice except to leave Indonesia once independence was granted. The Japanese, who had been around, obviously left, but many of them had been killed. And altogether it looks like there was like about 50,000 to 100,000 civilians killed. And then up to about 50,000 combat. So on the Indonesian side, there's about 50,000 combat dead. On the Dutch, British, Japanese side, there was about 10,000. And then there was about 50 to 100,000 civilians. So, pretty horrible war, but considering what came later on in Indonesia, it wasn't actually the worst. What happened in the 60s, where they killed 500,000 people. So, pretty bad. But it's also strange because you don't think that the Dutch would do this. They'd be that bothered. Countries in bits, you'd think, we're going to start a war. Probably not the best thing to do. Probably just best to leave. But perhaps they saw they had to do this, or they felt they needed to do this to prove themselves in the post-war era. And another thing that happened as well, the United States pressured them to leave as well. It pressured them to give independence because they were going to stop aid to the Netherlands if they didn't. So the United States, using its power and money to pressure for decolonialization. Was that a good idea? Hard to know. Although it probably was a good idea if the Netherlands get out, because it's very hard to rule a place that's in rebellion. So, independence was actually transferred on the 27th December 1949. That's when countries started to recognize the United States of Indonesia, which later on, very quickly, I think a year later, was changed to the Republic of Indonesia. So, on this day, the 2nd of November 1949, the Dutch, grudgingly, after a long, bloody war, agree to transfer sovereignty to the new United States of Indonesia. If you like these videos, come back tomorrow and watch more. Subscribe, comment, and leave a like.